podcast not seen since the age of legends. This is the One Power Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to episode 2. My name is Greg.
And I'm Thorne.
And we are back. If you tuned in last time, our first episode, we are just getting started. We are still super excited to be here. I don't know if Thorne is as excited to be here as I am, but I know I'm friggin' stoked.
I'm pretty excited, but you're a lot more energetic than I am.
I am a lot louder, ladies and gentlemen. That is what that means, is I am a lot louder, and I will take it. But needless to say, we're excited to be back. But, you know, Thorne and I actually don't live anywhere near each other. So, Thorne, how have you been?
I've been good. I just got off of a long weekend. 4 days.
Oh, wow, 4 days. I only got 3, and I had to request those.
Yeah, I get Saturdays and Sundays off anyways, and my daycare was closed on Friday, and I was already off on Monday for Memorial Day, so I ended up with a 4-day weekend, and I'm kind of glad to be back at work.
Yeah, I can't say I say the same about my job. 3 days was definitely too short, but I also work typically 6 days a week, so you know, I get maybe 1 day a week off. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, my thing is that I don't really get a day off because even on my weekends, I have the baby.
Oh, that's a good point. But at least you're not like going into a job where you have responsibilities other than, I guess, motherhood. But you know, that's what my grandma used to say. You know, a man's work is son from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. Right?
Yeah, pretty much. I can agree with that because I could not be a stay-at-home mom. It would drive me insane.
That's what my wife says. Even though we have yet to have kids, she says she doesn't want to stay at home.
I think she's right because I tried staying at home. Well, I stayed home for the first 6 weeks, and I was really happy to go back to work.
Well,
I'm not. Well, I'm very introverted. So it's not about socializing with other people. It's just being able to exit the house.
Right. To change of scenery and pace.
Without having a small gremlin at your side.
I've talked to a lot of my friends who have had kids, and you know, they've told me, they're like, you know, first couple of weeks is great because, you know, you're, you know, new baby, motherhood, all that stuff. And then about week 3, you're just kind of like, back to normal. Is there such thing as normal anymore? You know, so I definitely won't experience that. My wife has yet to experience that, but I've had several friends that have had kids, and that's what they all tell me is, you know.
I disagree. I was really frustrated because in the hospital, like, I got up to use the bathroom. And then on my way back, I just kind of stood by the bassinet and was just looking at the baby. I wasn't doing anything. She was asleep. And a nurse came in at that time, and she got mad at my husband for letting me stand up, and that if I wanted the baby, that he should go and get her for me. And I was like, I was up using the bathroom. I just wanted to look at her. I was like, I'm just standing here. I'm not doing anything strenuous.
Well, like I said, I haven't had that kind of experience as a dad, and definitely won't have one as a mom. but we've heard, and your experience just kind of adds to the litany of experiences that we have been regaled with, and to the point that my wife is terrified. But needless to say,
she should be.
Do it.
She should be.
Okay, Taylor, if you ever end up listening to this show, we may have to edit that part out. Anyway, but that's an update that will bring us into our subject matter tonight. So my wife, in between recording last week and this week, has actually begun reading Wheel of Time.
Yay!
And it was honestly unexpected. I'm not like a toxic fan, but I'm a very enthusiastic fan. So, you know, if you tell me you're not going to do something or you will, then I'll leave you alone. like, oh, I'll read it later or whatever, and I'll say, okay, well, you're missing out, and then I'll drop it for a while, and if it comes back up, I'll bring it up. So my wife, we have a ton of books, like no exaggeration. I have over 1,000, and we're sitting in the living room the other night, and she says, "Hey, go get me something to read." Bad Wheel of Time fan. Wheel of Time was not the first thing on my mind, but I asked the question, well, "What do you want to read?" Well, she answered by saying, "You're going to bring me Wheel of Time, aren't you?" And I said, "You know what? With that attitude, yes, I am." So I got up and I went and I got Eye of the World and put it in her hands. And my wife begins to read the book out loud. So she's reading everything we're about to talk about out loud. I think we read through chapter 3 that night because she passed it to me and made me read it to her out loud. And it was kind of cool. But she is keeping good pace. She's going to be ahead of the show as far as our chapter by chapter discussion, which we're about to get into. So hopefully my wife will be among our listeners. If not, I will have failed as a husband.
I hope she listens.
I think she will. I think she will. So talking about what we're going to discuss tonight, what are we exactly discussing tonight, Thorne?
Okay, so we're going to do the prologue, chapter 1, and chapter 2.
Insofar as we are able.
Yeah, hopefully, I think we should be able to do okay with getting all 3 of these chapters done. If anybody's noticed, our title for this episode is Dragon Mount, an Empty Stranger, which sounds a lot more ominous than it actually is going to be.
It's
maybe just a little ominous.
I mean,
but not
there's
that
a couple of ominous parts, but when Thorne and I were discussing episode titles, I was just looking through the table of contents actually in Eye of the World, and I was thinking to myself, what if we just took the chapters we were discussing and we just mashed their titles together? So obviously the prologue is Prologue Dragon Mount, chapter 1 is An Empty Road, and chapter 2 is Strangers. So we just kind of co-opted all of that into one episode name. I think it really worked with this one, but there's going to be some challenges ahead as far as matching some of these chapters together. So it will be interesting to see what we come up with. Thorne, or is there anybody out there that shouldn't listen to this episode?
So if you have not read through chapter 2 of The Eye of the World, don't listen to this episode. But it's 3 chapters. I think you can do it. You can do it. I believe in you.
In other words, pause this, go read it, come back and hit play, and you'll be fine.
Exactly.
That's exactly what we're going to do. All right, so so getting into it, so Eye of the World, just a little bit of background, just as kind of as far as just some technical stuff. I say technical, I guess just factual. Obviously, this is the first book written in the Wheel of Time series. 14 books in the main series and 1 prequel for 15 total. Big-time fans know this. New fans probably know this too, if you're still this early in your reading. This book is as old as I am. I am 29 years old. This book was published like 2 weeks before I was born. So this book and I are the same age. What?
This book is older than I am.
Yes. I don't know if we established that on this show yet. I know we established it on Black Tower, but I am older than Thorne. Not by that much, but I guess it's enough.
You're an old man.
Shh, I'm not 30 yet. Which I'm just saying, if anyone from Tor.com is listening to this episode, please release a 30th anniversary edition of Eye of the World. I will shut up and you will take my money. That is just how that's going to happen. Okay. So
that would be cool if they did something with like some new art.
Right?
That would be exciting. Although, you know what they're probably going to do?
What are they probably?
It's probably going to be show photos.
No. Okay, y'all, it's time for Greg to rant. Okay. I love reading, and I love original artwork and original covers. I do not like tie-in covers. I just don't.
I agree.
I just don't like them. I mean, when I was a kid, it didn't matter because the book was in my hand and I just cared about the content, which ultimately is what's important. But I'm really weird when it comes to books. Like, I'm very particular. I got into a whole Facebook argument with several of my friends because they're like, oh, dog earring pages is no big deal. I'm like, you're all animals. Like, do not dog ear your books. which, Thorne, you're real quiet, so you probably dog ear your books, huh?
No, I was just letting you talk. I actually have this really pretty bookmark. You should get one for your wife. They're really pretty. They're made out of metal and they have like a little dingly charm and it like curves.
Oh, might need to.
One of my friends or my old roommate gave it to me because his wife at the time told him that she reads, but she didn't.
Mm.
So this bookmark was just laying around and he was like, "Here, you can have this. You do read."
And I think right now she's using my Doctor Who bookmark to keep her place.
You can get her a pretty one.
I'll think about it. No, I usually just let her pick stuff out, but she never really wants stuff like that. But she's also weird when it comes to books too, which is why I'm just kind of amazed that she's reading Wheel of Time. So I'm like, shh, don't disturb her. Let her go read. That's what she's doing right now. She's in another part of the apartment where she can't hear us and she can't get recorded, and she's reading. So a lot of Wheel of Time going on in this apartment tonight, and I am here for it. So,
oh, here's a pretty one. I'm going to send it to you to think about getting your way.
Everyone, if you want bookmark recommendations, please tweet us, and Thorne will send you some.
I will, especially if you want pretty ones.
So let's get into the content. So, like I said, book is about 30 years old. I'm 29, so it's 29. It's the series itself has been pretty well received, and we're jumping into the beginning of the whole thing. So this right here is the beginning of this. What's essentially a 14-part epic. And if you haven't gotten very far into the series yet, you don't know how epic it's going to get, and that's enough about that. But the beginning starts. Some people have. I have a good friend named Jeff who read this prologue, and he had some very humorous and slightly critical things to say about it. But this was also 1990, so I can kind of make some allowances, I guess. But when the book opens up, it opens up to a pretty grim and chaotic scene. Everyone is immediately introduced to the fact that Robert Jordan writes description very, very well.
Yes.
Sometimes too well.
I love his descriptions.
I really like it. So, I mean, if you okay, so like the opening line, the palace still shook occasionally as the earth rumbled in memory, groaned as if it would deny what had happened. Okay, so I was reading this book the other day called How to Read Novels Like a Professor. And he makes this big deal, this whole chapter about how books start, how novels start. And basically that first line is the hook. It's going to reach in there, it's going to hook you, and it's going to pull you in. So the first line of books, that's almost the most important thing in the whole book, because after you read the first line, you've got to have incentive to keep going.
I feel like the first sentence does a really good job of that, because it's like something is happening and you don't know what's happening, and it makes you want to read the next line, like what had happened.
So looking at the scene further, we're seeing that this palace is basically, it's somehow still standing for the most part, but it's ruined. Something has happened, some type of chaotic episode. We're not sure what. People are dead. Yes.
People are dead.
Super dead.
Laying everywhere, strewn across the ground.
Super dead. Like super dead. You can see where there's scorch marks on the walls, floors, ceilings. I'm literally just reading off the book right now. But then, interestingly enough, after getting this whole scene set up, this man is seen wandering through the palace, kind of almost in a daze, if we can kind of infer that. And we are introduced for the first time to Luz Theron Telamon, who at this point we know nothing about.
Except that he has a wife named Ileana.
And you can see him kind of walking around. He's calling out to her. He's wanting to know where she is. But we get clued in to his state of mind right after we see him call out to her, because as he's calling out to her and looking for her,
your attention is drawn.
Right. Well, I like the way Jordan does this. He doesn't pointedly say that her body is laying on the ground. he just says that he steps across the body of a woman, her golden-haired beauty marred by the horror of her last moments, her still open eyes frozen in disbelief. And he's still looking for his wife, but there's a big inference there, which is actually true, that that's his wife. And he just walked over her body like he didn't even see it. So, when I first started reading this book, I was like, this dude has lost it. And I bet he killed her. I bet he did. Like, that was my first reaction to that.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid inference.
Well, and I just like the way he kind of slips it in there, though. He doesn't come around and say Ileana, who is laying on the ground. He just kind of
he doesn't hold the reader's hand.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a very good way to put it.
He just points out this specific woman who's on the ground dead, and he doesn't have to say that was Lews Theron's wife. You already know.
And I think that's one of the things
it's
right. And I think that's one of the things that drew me into this part of the book is, because I've read some books and they were good books, but they were descriptive in the wrong ways. They were descriptive for the sake of fact, not for the sake of ambiance and immersion. Does that make sense?
Yes, I agree. I feel like everything that all the description in this adds to the story.
Right.
Like, you've got the description of what Lews Theron looks like. Whenever he looks at his own reflection, and it points out little details that helps explain the scene before you, because it mentions, I guess, the wall is askew from bubbled marble. So marble is a very, very hard stone, and the fact that it's like bubbling. And then it describes what Lews Theron looks like, and it describes his clothes as they had been regal once, and had gray, scarlet, and gold, and finely woven cloth brought by merchants from across the world sea. But all of his clothes was torn and dirty and thick with dust, including his hair and skin. So he is dirty and disheveled. So he was in whatever has happened, but he has no idea what's going on.
But even before we get to, I guess, the answer of what has happened, again, there's an inference that he is either he knows somewhere in his mind, he knows what's happened, and either he is the one that committed it, or he knows of it, but something has happened to him where he is oblivious to it. He's out of his mind right now. One thing I want to call quick attention to is it says, for a moment he fingered the symbol on his cloak, a circle half white and half black, the color separated by a sinuous line. People who have not read this series, ever, like this is your first read through and hopefully you're a little bit ahead of us, that's the first time you see a certain symbol, you're going to hear that exact description come up again and again and again. And I mean, when I say again and again and again, I'm like, Robert Jordan, did you copy paste? Because it's exactly the same description.
If you just look at our symbol right now, that is a symbol. The half white, half black symbol combining together. It's basically yin and yang, but opposite.
Kind of, yeah, a little. It's a little different, and we'll touch on this a lot too. Is Robert Jordan pulled from so many different things to build this world, and when I say that, I mean different religions, different cultures. I mean they weren't just thrown together. I mean they were very, very well done and well placed, and obviously inspired. In fact, there's a character coming in that's going to call Lews Theron something that's going to bring up something from Christianity, as a matter of fact. But in this description, though, we see that this guy was somebody important. We don't know who Lews Theron Telamon is right now, other than that he was important, he's out of his mind, and his wife is dead, and everybody else around him is dead. So we have no clue other than that.
Well, we don't necessarily know that he is important. We know that he is a handsome man, and at the very least, he has money.
Well, and I would say, I guess that begs the question: does because he said his clothes had been regal once, and it describes all the nice stuff, and then he's got this symbol on his cloak. So I guess when I was first reading it, I was like, okay, this guy, he's a nice dresser. He's wandering around a palace. He's calling for his wife. This dude is probably the one that lived here, and he belongs to something.
Well, I assume that too.
Yeah. So I mean,
but I also thought that he was a madman, so
I mean that's fair.
He was fixating on something, because I work at a hospital for the mentally ill, and clients will sometimes fixate on things, and it doesn't matter what it is. That's what they're very focused on. So that's kind of probably what I was thinking whenever I read it, even though back whenever I read it, I was in high school.
That's still fair. I mean, because like you said, he is fixated, and walking over these dead bodies and not even really noticing them kind of informs his state of mind.
Yeah, and then there's the part after it describes him where he just starts laughing.
Right, and then he's still calling to his wife, but instead of asking where she's at, he's just like, "Hey, you need to come see this," and he's looking at himself in a mirror.
Yeah, he thinks that the way that he looks at this point is hilarious. He's all like, "Look at me, I'm dirty and disheveled. Like, what's even going on?" So he's aware that he looks inappropriate, I guess. That he's not aware of what happened.
Right. So as all this is happening, we get a description that the air behind him begins to ripple, and then a man just kind of seemingly appears. The ripple kind of solidifies, it says, into a man who looked around, and he's kind of looking around with disgust and distaste. He's just kind of looking around like, ugh, what happened here? This is disgusting. He's not as tall as Lews Therin, but he's in all black, and he's got a little bit of white lace and silver work on his. So he doesn't have much color. So
he's very dramatic.
Yeah, he's very dramatic. So, and actually, I overlooked this the first couple of times I went through this earlier. It says this new guy, he stepped carefully, handling his cloak fastidiously to avoid brushing the dead. So he's kind of prim. He's like, ooh, dead body. No.
Cool. I don't know. I think that if I appeared somewhere and there's just dead bodies everywhere, that I wouldn't want my clothes to touch them.
Well,
but that's just me.
I don't know. Maybe instead of it betraying that he's kind of like prim and proper, maybe instead it's informing that he is, because a lot of people, let's just be real, a lot of people when they show up, they have if he had showed up like that, and he was, because this kind of tells me that this guy's not good. When he shows up, he doesn't freak out. He doesn't say, "Oh my God, what happened here?" He's just like, and then he's just like carefully walking around the bodies, almost like he expected this.
Yeah, and his attention was fixed on Lews Therin too.
So when the book says that, the first thing this guy says is, "Lord of the Morning, I have come for you." And what's interesting is Lord of the Morning. It's I feel like Robert Jordan, in his infinite, I know all kinds of stuff, kind of, I don't know if he did it consciously or subconsciously, but in the Bible, Satan is referred to as son of the morning. So,
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I believe it's Ezekiel. There's a couple of places, but in Ezekiel it details, or is it Isaiah? In one of the prophets, the prophetic books in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it details Satan's fall from heaven, and it says, "Oh, son of the morning," addressing, like speaking of Satan and his fall, Lucifer. Lucifer actually means son of the morning. So I just thought that was interesting, even though that's not exactly telling of Lews Therin's character, I just thought that was a very interesting title that Robert Jordan gave to Lews Therin.
Yes. And here's an interesting line. Lews Therin says, a guest. Have you the voice, stranger? It will soon be time for singing, and here all are welcome to take part. And then he continues, Ileana, my love, we have a guest. Ileana, where are you?
And so this dude is so oblivious to everything.
But the voice and singing comes into play later.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's just something that's briefly mentioned here, but it's really like I didn't notice it my first read
Mm-hmm.
through.
I've just now noticed it. Thanks.
So
I totally overlooked it.
you
Yeah,
realize
no,
what was
exactly.
happening
And we're not
now with
right,
certain
right.
things.
And here's the thing, guys. This book series is extremely layered, and it definitely has callbacks to earlier books. So when you read something in this book, this book and books to come, do not ever be surprised if things get tied up. Because when I say that the way this book series goes and ends, and the way it's done, and the way it's tied together and is tied up by the time it ends, I mean, I don't know why the showrunners of Game of Thrones didn't take notes, because they really dropped the ball, but that's not what the show's about. But Robert Jordan knows how to land a plane. Now, I know Brandon Sanderson wrote the last three, but Robert Jordan had it all plotted. He had it all planned. And Brandon, of course, came in after Robert's death and finished actually writing it and actually putting it out there. But it was all Robert Jordan's idea and plan and everything. So this man knew how to land this plane, and he lands it very
Yeah,
well. But he knows how to take off, too, which is what's happening right here.
yeah, he knew what he was doing the whole time,
Oh,
for
absolutely.
sure. And this is another interesting line. The black-clad man's eyes widened, darted to the body of the golden-hair woman. So he knows who Ileana is.
Right, yeah, the new guy, the black-clad man, who we don't have a name for yet. But his eyes widen before they dart to the woman's body. So when his eyes widen, that means he is clued in to Lews Theron's state of mind, because when he showed up, Lews Theron wasn't talking to anyone. He might have still been chuckling and looking in the mirror, and then he shows up and sees him looking in the mirror. He says, "Lord of the Morning, I've come for you," and then Lews Theron acts like nothing's wrong, like he's at a party, like all these dead people around him are up and living, party guests.
And then he just starts calling for his wife again, and obviously this man just like looks at the woman who we've already kind of been clued in is probably his wife, and it's confirmed here. At least that's enough confirmation for
sure.
me,
and
because his eyes went straight to that woman.
And then he says, "Shaitan take you, does the taint already have you so far in its grip?" Now, we don't have a lot of context for any of that yet, but what we can take from that is the fact that he is actually surprised. He's like, "Oh man, this guy's already this far gone." Whatever the reason may be, whatever all this stuff is, this guy in black is like, "Oh crap, this guy is already that far gone. He's already this crazy." So much that he actually swears by someone or something in order to express how surprised he is.
Yeah, and Lews Theron recognizes it and is creeped out and actually says that the name Shaitan is dangerous. He doesn't say the word Shaitan, of course. He stops himself,
right,
because he's afraid of the word, even though he doesn't really remember why.
It's kind of like Voldemort in Harry Potter, the whole "he who must not be named" type of thing. And the guy kind of is boastful and says, "Well, it doesn't really hurt, for me to say it. Don't you, remember these things?" And he calls him an idiot. But what he gets to, though, and this is where we start seeing some stuff get peeled back here, is we move forward a little bit, and Lews Theron, he's kind of. This is actually where we really see how crazy he is, because it says, "For a moment, Lews Theron stared at his raised hand, fascinated by the patterns of grime." Like, he's so out of it that he's like, "Oh, look, there's dirt on my hands. That's cool." And he's just like looking at it while trying to converse with this stranger. And then when he calls to him and says, "Okay, who are you? What do you want?" the man names himself. And he says, "I was once called Elon Morin Tedranai, but now," and then Lews Theron comes in, and like a snap, memories are starting to come back. And he says, "Betrayer of Hope," which we are now going to infer is a title of this man who has appeared before Lews Theron.
Yeah, and speaking of titles, this is where so he's already Elon, this man, has already called Lews Theron Lord of the Morning, but he also adds more titles.
Mm-hmm.
And he says men name me just as they've named you dragon. And then he also mentions that after this day, men will call you kinslayer.
Which confuses Lews Therin because he's like, what are you talking about, dude? Everything's fine. Like, this guy is out of it. And when he says, people are going to call you kinslayer, he's like, why? And he's like, oh, well, my wife should be here to offer you a welcome. You know.
He doesn't even ask why. He's just like, Ileana should be here. Like, Ileana's going to be mad at me if I'm hiding guests from her. Like, and just starts calling for his wife again. And Elon is getting frustrated and starts naming even more titles for Lews Therin. He was first among the servants with a capital S, and he wore the ring of Tamerlane and sat in the high seat, and something about 9 rods of dominion. Like, there's all this information. So you are at this point assuming that Lews Therin must be super important.
And then we get some info on their relationship, because he says, look at you, you were all these things, and now you're a pitiful shattered wretch, but it's not enough. He's like, you humbled me in the hall of servants, you defeated me at the gates of Paradisen. This completely and totally, if we had any doubt, solidifies this man as Lews Therin's enemy, who he has defeated at least a couple of times. He humbled in one sense. We don't know exactly what that means, but then actually says defeated at the gates of Paradisen. Again, we don't have any context for any of this stuff. Like, the audience right now is just being introduced to this scene.
I don't think that any of this stuff is actually clarified for us ever. As far as I remember.
We don't tell them that right now. We let them discover
that.
Sorry. But there are some things that some details that we never fully get ironed out that is true. But this guy...
But yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Elon, this guy, as he has said he was once named, or the betrayer of hope, he's kind of gloating at the end of this, though. He's like, you were like this, but then you did this to me. He says, but I'm the greater now, and I'm not going to die without you knowing that.
Let you die.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't care about himself dying. He just doesn't want Lews Therin dying without knowing what happened. And then we get to the point where, of course, Lews Therin at this point is still calling for his wife and talking about his wife, like, even though she's pretty much right next to his feet, dead. And Elon makes a decision to heal him, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentions that his sisters, that it's a pity that one of his sisters was not here, but it's not sisters. Normally it's sisters with a capital S. And he says that he was never very skilled at healing and that he follows a different power. And then he says, but I fear Shaitan's healing is different from the sort you know. And he reaches his hands out and heals Lews Therin, which is an extremely painful experience for Lews.
And when you read this description, and we won't have to go through all of it, but when you read this description of this quote-unquote healing, it doesn't sound like healing. I mean, I know there's some pain with healing sometimes, like you put peroxide on a wound or you set a bone, but then the pain, it flares and then it goes away and you end up feeling, you start to feel better, everything starts to mend. But you don't get that from this description of the pain and everything flowing through him and the reaction he had to it. And you guys can actually compare this to things that happen later in the book as far as, healing is concerned, and just kind of see the difference for yourself. But he goes through all of this. He has this huge sensation. And then when he comes to after all of this, we see he comes back to himself. He comes back to his right mind. He finally discovers that his wife is laying on the floor, and he, grabs her and begins to grieve, calling out for the light to help him. And, we see that this guy is now fully aware of what's going on where he was not before.
Yeah. And then Elon makes him an offer that if if Lews Therin chooses to follow the Great Lord of the Dark, that he could bring her back to life. And Lews Therin is angry.
Mm-hmm.
He assumes that Elon was the one who killed Ileana.
Right.
And he says that the war that it's been 10 years since your foul master has racked the world. And Elon claims that the war hadn't lasted just 10 years, that it had lasted since the beginning of the beginning of
And I
time.
love this part here because this is our first real glimpse into the mythology and the workings of this world. Because, he says, just read it real quick. He says, 10 years, you pitiful fool. This war has not lasted 10 years, but since the beginning of time, you and I have fought 1,000 battles with the turning of the wheel, 1,000 times 1,000, and we will fight until time dies and the shadow is triumphant. So right there is established with us the cyclical nature of time in this, I guess you could almost say, universe, but in this world, in this book series. And like that little,
I would call it a universe.
yeah, we could. But that little nugget right there, like you can latch onto that, boys and girls, because that is the first glimpse or explanation of how things work in this universe, and it's going to come up again and again and again. And no really weird pun intended, because the wheel turns again and again and again. Anyway, but he did all this, and then really what happens next is kind of crazy.
Yeah, Lews Therin starts to accuse Elon of killing Ileana. And that's whenever Elon says, "Remember, you fool, remember your futile attack on the great Lord of the Dark. Remember his counterstroke, remember. Even now the 100 companions are tearing the world apart, and every day 100 men more join them. What hand slew Ileana's son, Hair Kinslayer? Not mine, not mine." And it says, "What hand struck down every life that bore a drop of your blood? Everyone who loved you, everyone who loved you? Not mine, Kinslayer, not mine. Remember and know the price of opposing Shaitan." Sorry, I felt like I needed to read that whole
Well,
part.
and there's a lot of good stuff there. And one thing I wanted to bring out from that part is the fact that this is where we see Great Lord of the Dark and Shaitan put together, and he's identified as that, because he says Great Lord of the Dark, and then you connect that to Shaitan at the end of the paragraph. But right after that, he says, remember his counterstroke, which is that the 100 companions are tearing the world apart, and every day 100 men more join them. So whatever this Great Lord of the Dark did, it's affected Lews Therin, men that he has stood beside and presumably fought and served beside, and it's affecting more and more men, and there is chaos reigning everywhere, not just in this palace. So whatever has happened has been this momentous event that he calls it a counterstroke. So basically, what I would infer from that is Lews Therin and these 100 companions did something to Shaitan, to this Great Lord of the Dark, and then as his counterstroke, or his retaliation, was doing something that drove these men insane.
Yes. And at this point is whenever Lews Therin starts to remember everything that happens. And it describes the sound he makes as a howl.
Mm-hmm.
So he is realizing, and he is mourning, and he is clawing at his face and freaking out because he realized, and everywhere he's looking are just his family members dead, and his friends and family and everybody. And the betrayer, Elon, starts just laughing at him. He thinks it's hilarious. He loves watching Lews Therin in pain. And this is the first time that we hear about the true source. Uh, uh, Lews Therin reaches for the true source, and he traveled, and that's traveled with a capital T. So it's clearly something other than normal traveling.
Right. It's almost like a form of
And
teleportation.
Yeah, and then it describes him holding on to Sidene and just drawing the power, and it describes the source as being tainted. It describes Sidene as being tainted, and it describes touching Sidene as an oily taint fouling its surface. And then it mentions that it's the taint of the shadows, counterstroke, the taint that doomed the world.
And see, the reason we're crawling basically through the prologue, and we'll probably get through chapters 1 and 2 real quick, is because this is like this prologue. People don't realize when they first read it is just packed with stuff. Like
Yes.
there's so much. When we could literally do a whole episode on the prologue, we should have. But the
Right. That's
but needless to say, we get some glimpses in here, and we're actually probably at some point going to come back and touch more on this when we do topical episodes. We'll probably do a topical episode on the One Power itself, and we'll reference here and other parts of the series. But basically, what is inferred from that is he grabs this power that has drove him crazy, this power that has been tainted. Probably now, if you're really connecting the dots here with what you've been given, you can connect it back to the Dark Lord, to Shaitan, who has done something to this power, which is described as the male half of the power that drove the universe, that turned the wheel of time, which is pretty big, but there's going to be a lot more about that later. But basically what ends up happening is he doesn't teleport. I'll say teleport. He travels, which is essentially like teleporting. He travels out basically to just this plane. There's nothing around him. And in his grief and his rage and his anger, he's begging for the light to forgive him. And he just deeply draws on the true source. And this display of power is pretty awesome.
Yeah, the earth is shaking, lightning is coming from the sky. Everything that could possibly happen with this power apparently is happening right now.
And he essentially creates a mountain.
Yeah, it even describes it as the earth thrashed and quivered like a living thing in agony. So what he's doing basically looks like the earth is in pain.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good way to put it. And then from all of this turmoil and all of this just upheaval, this mountain forms. And it's like this gushing volcano when it first forms. It has molten lava gushing from its broken peak, the book says. And then I think also, let me make sure I'm reading this right because I've got it here.
It split the river into
to form a long island in the middle of the river. And so basically, he actually, when he did this, he did two things. He did three things. We'll talk about the third one in a second. He created this mountain out of his rage and anger and his just enormous use of the power. He creates this mountain and, number two, an island in the middle of a nearby river. But the last thing we know that he's done is, well, kill himself. He wasn't there.
Yeah.
He was gone after. And after all that, if you're still alive, you must be God, because there's nobody's going to survive that. And but the island itself, as the prologue closes out, the individual, the betrayer of hope, he basically shows up on the island, and he's just looking at this mountain that's basically a churning volcano right now, and he's pissed. And he says, "You can't escape so easily, dragon. It's not done between us." So basically, he's mad that Lews Theron's gone and done this to himself. And then he was gone, and the mountain and the island stood alone, waiting.
Okay, I would like to read these parts that are in between.
Oh, please, yes.
The prologue and the chapter, because I just really like these. In the beginnings and endings of each book, they have quotes that we assume are from different writers in the world, even though we never actually see them. So the first one is from Alith Nin Terran Alta Camora, The Breaking of the World, author unknown, The Fourth Age. it says, "And the shadow fell upon the land, and the world was riven stone from stone. The oceans fled, and mountains were swallowed up, and the nations were scattered to the 8 corners of the world. The moon was as blood, and the sun was as ashes. The seas boiled, and the living envied the dead. All was shattered, and all memory lost, and one memory above all others, of him who brought the shadow and the breaking of the world, and they named him Dragon." And then the second one is from Charal Drianan Tekalaman, The Cycle of the Dragon, author unknown, the Fourth Age. "And it came to pass in those days, as it had come before and would come again, that the dark lay heavy on the land and weighed down the hearts of men. And the green things failed, and hope died. And men cried out to the Creator, saying, O light of the heavens, light of the world, let the promised one be born of the mountain, according to the prophecies, as he was in ages past and will be in ages to come. Let the Prince of the Morning seem to the land that green things will grow, and the valley gives forth lambs. Let the arm of the Lord of the dawn shelter us from the dark, and the great sword of justice defend us. Let the dragon ride again on the winds of time."
Which, if you are reading physical copies of the books, a lot of them have that last part, "Let the dragon ride again on the winds of time," on the back of the book.
Yes. It's a very interesting thing that makes it kind of it catches
It
your
really
attention.
does. Now, scooting over to chapter 1, and we'll be able to get through chapter 1 and 2 a little quicker because a lot of these are just scenery descriptions that I don't want to say we're going to gloss over, but we don't have to pay as much attention to in discussion here. But this is this first part's important. This first paragraph is important because this first paragraph has an iteration in every single book in every first chapter. In fact,
this is my heart.
Like, I told my wife that. She's like, "Oh, that's really cool." I'm like, "No, seriously, like, by the time you get to book 14 and you read that for the 14th time, it's a little more than cool. It's like in your blood by that point." And it goes...
It's in your bones.
It really is.
Okay.
So it's...
Sorry. I have to get into this. So I whenever I started reading the books, it was probably around the time or not long after Knife of Dreams. And it was right before Robert Jordan died. And I found out about this, and I was so sad because I thought that I wasn't gonna that our story wasn't gonna be completed. And then it was announced that Brandon Sanderson was going to be taking over, and I got a copy of I got a hold of the copy of The Gathering Storm, and I was like, my brain was like, I need this. And whenever I opened that first chapter, and it started the same way as book 1 through 11 had, I legit cried. I was so happy.
So the only variation really between book to book is that he uses this paragraph to properly begin the story, because the prologue is like, you guys, and you watch some TV shows, and there's like a couple of minutes of the show, like the show starts, and then the intro plays, and then you get into the actual episode. That's kind of how Robert Jordan's prologues are. But then when he gets to this paragraph in chapter 1 in every book, okay, this is yes. And then the only thing that really changes is the setting. Like it kind of comes at a different setting. But here's how chapter 1, book 1 reads. It says, "The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the third age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning." And the only thing that changes between the books is where the wind rises from. So in this book, it's from a mountain range called the Mountains of Mist. So it's setting the stage, setting the scene for us. But honestly, it's one of the cooler literary devices I've seen used. I don't know that, I'm not saying it doesn't exist and another author hasn't done it, but this is the only book series I've read where the author has basically started his book in the same way every single one. But when you read that, it's like, I'm back. I'm back in this story. Like, I'm in this.
Yes.
It's almost like well, okay.
It's like a part of our souls now.
Well, and I was to continue to use the TV show analogy. If the prologue is like the cold open, and then the next paragraph where everything really begins, here is the show proper. This is the theme song. This is the intro music. This is the show's starting. Hey, the story's back on. And then we get into everything. So what we're seeing here is, and there's a lot of description here, we're seeing basically it's just kind of, the wind rises out of these mountains of mist, and we're basically taken to like a country forest road. And we meet two men on this road, father and son, respectively Tam and Rand al'Thor. And the wind is whipping around them, the same wind that rose out of the mountains of mist, and he's describing how they feel with the wind and everything. But these men are walking down the road with a mare in between them. Basically, they're carting something, and they're going somewhere. They are on a trip on this road going somewhere. Don't know where just yet. But one, go ahead.
It is mentioned that because I don't think that we need to get too far into the descriptions, but we do know that Rand is our point of view here, and that he is carrying a bow, an arrow, and he is ready to draw it if he needs it. So, and it mentions that how bad the winter had been previously, and it describes it. It gives us points that make you aware, like saying that wolves were driven down into this place called the Two Rivers, and they were raiding sheep pens and chewing their ways into barns and cattle to get to cattle and horses, and bears were coming down too, and that they point this out as a strange thing, which is why they're carrying weapons down this road.
So basically,
to protect.
Right, to protect themselves, and basically the scene we're getting here is things aren't that great for these guys. They're having to protect themselves. We're seeing where the winter has not let up. That's actually blatantly mentioned that the winter has lasted longer than usual. And of course, the mare is named Bella, which this comes up more. So that's why if it's a name character, we're going to mention it. Yes, there's over 2,000 name characters in this book series, and we're going to name every one of them, dang it. But basically these two men are walking down the road, through these colder conditions. They've got arrows knocked, kind of being aware. And then we learn that they are transporting something. We end up learning it's actually apple brandy to Emmons Field. I'm looking through the paragraphs.
And apple cider.
Yeah, apple brandy and apple cider, which I think they talk a little more about the brandy. But they're going to a place called Emmons Field. So what we see there is these guys don't live in Emmons Field. They live somewhere else, which we come to learn in the next few paragraphs, or actually throughout this chapter, that they basically live on a farm outside of Emmons Field. It takes them a few hours to get back and forth.
In an area called the Waterwood.
Is the Westwood. Because the Waterwood, because I actually just read this. Because Matt, when he's introducing a little bit, he's talking to someone, and he says that we don't go into the Waterwood because the Waterwood has bogs and swamps and things like that. The Westwood, they make a point later, which we can go ahead and make this point now, is that no one really farms in the Westwood because it's hard, but that says a lot about Tam and Rand al'Thor.
Well, at least a lot about Tam, since he's the father, and it's
Rand learned from him.
But they're on their way to a specific inn called the Wine Spring Inn, and to use during Beltane, which I would like to talk about Beltane a little bit, because that's another name for a pagan spring festival. So that's, you can see we've already talked about
biblical references,
parallels, and I think that the yin and yang is
Eastern
Buddhism.
I believe so. I'll have to brush up on it, but but he's already drawn from
Um,
Christianity. He's already drawn from Eastern mysticism and religion, and then here it's paganism. I believe it's actually, if memory serves, isn't it Celtic?
I believe so.
Have to do some more research on that. We don't.
Which is also funny though. Sorry, because of A Wheel of Time, uh, the the pagans do a Wheel of the Year for their
Oh,
holidays.
that makes more sense. But see, it's like we said earlier. Robert Jordan is he's drawing on lots of inspiration. But like I said, the way he weaves it throughout the entire series, it's I don't want to go so far as to say it's seamless, but it fits. It all fits together very well. It doesn't feel like it's just a smorgasbord of religions and philosophies. It all fits and makes a cohesive world and cohesive narrative, and it's actually very good. And it's in little stuff like that, like Beltane. Obviously these guys aren't pagans. I don't know if you could even call them pagans in this world, but they're not celebrating that festival. But
Really,
there's similarities and obvious inspirations from it.
yeah, I don't think that you could draw
A direct line necessarily.
well, except for maybe one set of characters that I'm not going to talk about because they're not introduced in these chapters.
Right. I think I know who you're thinking of. But anyway, we won't we won't tease people on that. So these guys are headed to Emmons Field for the Festival of Beltane, which is why they're bringing their cider and their brandy with them that they made at their farm. Now, what kind of happens here is as they're moving around, Rand just happens to glance over his shoulder and he sees a cloaked figure on horseback, and its rider's completely dressed in black, hood up, can't see it, but maybe the faintest outline of a face. And it's
So it's
right.
pretty far
He
away.
said not more than 20 spans back down the road, which is, you know, it's not incredibly far away, but it's close enough that he can see what this is, but not so close that it's right on top of them. So it's a decent distance behind them. So Rand sees this, has a bit of a freak out. He trips and falls on the ground because a stone catches his heel. And then, of course, Tam's like, "Hey, are you okay?" And then Rand's trying to describe this rider to him. When they both turn back and they look, the rider is gone. And it's like, where did he go? So the Rand's trying to, he's like, well, he was there, like he was just there, and of course his dad. I have to respect Tam here because he doesn't do the normal. Oh, you're just seeing stuff. You're just spooked. He says, it was a man on a black cloak on a black horse. He's like, I wouldn't doubt your word, lad, but where has he gone? He's like, if he was there, where did he go? So he asked the logical question, but he didn't make Rand feel like an idiot for seeing what he saw.
Yeah. He didn't treat he didn't treat Rand like he was stupid, and even offered to go back to go see if they could, because horses leave hoof prints.
Right.
So they were going to go and see, but Rand. This is whenever Tam offers to go back to go look for the hoof prints. This is whenever Rand realizes the odd thing about the horseman. So he couldn't quite put his finger on it, and the answer was that the wind that was beating at Tam and him and pulling his cloak around and making everything fly pretty much had not so much as shifted a fold of the black cloaked rider's clothing. So he assumes that he must have imagined it, and his dad was right.
Which is a very interesting thing is, even in hallucinations, how would you hallucinate something where the wind doesn't, it's just, it's weird. Like, even as a reader, first time reading it, you're like, that's really weird. Which obviously at Rand is weird, but in the excitement of things, if you will, that was a detail he forgot until he really started thinking about it. But needless to say, they don't find anything, and they get moving back on. This is the first time, this next paragraph, where he's talking about, he's just, describing Emmons Field and the area of the two rivers, by, way of saying how different everything looks recently. he mentions Matt Coffin and Perrin Ibarra, who are his friends, his closest friends. It's the first time they're mentioned, which we kind of learn that he went to. He's talking about the different places in the Two Rivers he's went, and he mentions that he's went all the way to the Mountains of Mist with Matt and Perrin, which we learn a little bit later is actually quite a feat for for Two Rivers boys. Because it says it's a lot further afield than most people in Emmonsfield ever went. And then we get some more names of some more villages. So we're seeing that Two Rivers is a region, and Emmonsfield is a town within that kind of that area. So,
Yeah.
but needless to say, they were Tam offers to go look. Rand says, "Well, there's really not a need to go look. No point for looking what isn't there." So they kind of get back on the way, and there's some.
And this is sorry, we were mentioning characters. He mentions, and I expect you're eager to see Egwene.
My wife and I joke that she says, "Okay, so I'm reading about egg white," and because when she first pronounced it, she said Egwene or Egwene or something like that, and I was like Egwene. She was like, and she had to repeat it a couple times, and then she was like, "Sounds like egg white," and I was like, "Yeah." Then we'll just call her egg white.
A little bit, yeah. And this actually explains who she is about a little bit, that she's the mayor's daughter. And that she makes him very nervous. So this is a 20-year-old man being very nervous about a girl. Although 20 is young for this world, apparently.
I mean, if I wasn't married, I'm 29 years old, I'd be pretty nervous about a girl. I'm still nervous about my wife sometimes, but hey, whatever. But anyway,
and
go ahead.
Here's another interesting part. Tam mentions, remember the flame lad and the void. So this is a weird thing that Tam mentions.
It's weird, but at the risk of sounding spoilery, it comes up again later. But it comes up later because it's Rand, and we're seeing a lot about him in this. But he basically it's like a calming technique, a focusing technique. And he's bringing his attention back to it because Tam can tell that Rand is flustered. He's kind of on edge. So he says, "Remember the flame lad and the void," which is concentrate on a single flame and feed all of your passions into it, your fear, your hate, your anger, until your might is empty and you become one with the void. And then when you become one with the void, which is almost like the epitome of focus, you could do anything. And the narrative makes the point that nobody else except Tam talks that way, but Tam wins the archery contest every year at Beltane. So there's got to be something to be said of this flame and void technique, because the man wins archery like a boss. And obviously he uses that technique. So there's something there. And of course, like I said, there's nothing arbitrary in these books. So you just need to just understand this is probably going to come back up later. But kind of moving along, because we're kind of over time, and I think we may have to do Chapter 3 next episode, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in Chapter 3. But they get back, they're moving back on their way after all their excitement, and they're moving through. Rand's kind of, running this stuff through his head, trying to believe that, he's like, well, maybe Tam was right, that it's just imagination, but he felt hatred off of it. So he's trying to reconcile what he saw and then didn't see versus what he felt. So he's he's mulling on all of that. He's thinking about all of that. And then not long after that, they get into the town of Emmonsfield, and we start meeting several different characters. I don't know if we have enough time to really touch on all of them, but there's 2 or 3 for sure that I know we need to speak on. The first one is Sinbui. Oh, Sinbui. So every good story has a crotchety old man, and in this story, at least the first crotchety old man we meet is Sinbui. He's the guy.
Have you?
Go ahead.
Sorry, have you seen the Sinbui Twitter account?
I can't. I'm trying to remember. I think I have, but it's been a minute.
He's hilarious. He just basically says, "Well, back in my day," and that's his big thing that he says, but he is absolutely hilarious. I love it.
So when Simbu is first mentioned, he's actually mentioned by his trade, which is he's the town thatcher, which we learn a little bit later he's really not that great at. But they mention him, and of course they're moving in. The town is getting ready for Beltane, so there are people about. And they're trying to deliver this cider and brandy to the Wine Spring Inn, which is run by Bran Alvear, which is both the innkeeper and the innkeeper of the Wine Spring Inn and the mayor of Emmonsfield. Now, what's interesting is as we're moving into town, we start meeting these different characters, and there's one man named Whit Conger that comes up and is trying to talk to Tam. And Tam's kind of like, all right, I really don't have a lot of time for you, dude. But he's an instigator. Whereas Simbui is basically he's a criticizer and a judger. Whit Conger is an instigator. So the first thing he does,
Simbui, I think, is that voice that says that gives the negative point of view. But he's not a bad person. He's not going to start stuff. He's going to do whatever he thinks is best.
He's an old man, and
he's an old man.
Yeah, he's from a small town,
But he's not stupid, and he's not necessarily mean.
I mean, depends on your definition of mean, but yeah, I don't think he means to be mean.
Like he's not gonna. He's not gonna like spread rumors.
No, he's not. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right about that. You're absolutely right about that. So he's not that kind of guy. He's just like, the old cynical grandpa figure that is definitely back in my day. We had to walk 30 miles in the snow, both directions uphill. He's that kind of guy. But this Whit Conger guy, he is an instigator. And the first thing he does when he walks up, one of the first things he tries to talk to Tam about when he walks up to Tam, he says, what are we going to do about Nynaeve, Althor? And Nynaeve, we learn in just a couple of paragraphs, is the village wisdom. And then we get a nice little look at how Emmonsfield is set up. The women have a women's circle, and the men have the village council. So basically these two bodies of government, that make it sound way too formal, but basically these two councils, if you will, these two bodies of leaders are the ones that collectively run Emmonsfield. They run the town, and the village council has the mayor, which is Bran Alvear, and then the wisdom is the leader of the women's circle, and that is Nynaeve Almira. And the contention here is that Nynaeve is very young for a wisdom.
Yes, that's mentioned quite a lot.
And I like what Tam tries to do first. When he, because Whit Conger comes up and he's like, we can't have a wisdom like this. What are we going to do about it? And he's like, look, it's not our place. This is women's business. So like there is like they deal with their own stuff, basically. And we see this really well illustrated because as Whit's trying to talk to Tam about all this and stir this up, Whit's wife comes out, Days Conger, comes out and is basically...
I kind of really like Days, honestly.
She comes out. I like her in this moment for sure. She comes out and she's basically like, what business is it of yours? What business of yours is the wisdom? Whit Conger roared his wife. So she comes out just swinging. And
she's described as a very big woman and not fat at all. It actually describes her as twice as wide as Whit, a hard-faced woman without an ounce of fat on her. So she is a buff woman.
And she really lays it on him because she comes out and she I'm sorry, I lost my spot. I was clicking through some stuff here.
Well, what she says to him is, you try meddling in women's circles business and you see how you like eating your own cooking, which you won't do in my kitchen, and washing your own clothes and making your own bed, which won't be under my roof.
So she basically comes out there and says, if you don't shut up, you know, and then
You're gonna be
and
out on your
what I
ass.
love about it is when Wit tries to like retort, he doesn't retort. He just says, "But days," and he says he's whining. He says, "Wit whine. This man is whining to her." And it goes from being just a little instigator to like a sniveling little, just almost like rat. Is kind of what I think of. But just
Yeah,
kind
a
of
little
speeding
bit.
this up a little bit.
And then Tam goes, "I'm
Yeah,
outie."
he's like, light shine on you both. Bye bye, goodbye. So just kind of getting through the rest of it, that the town is described. There's a village green where everything's going to be set up for the festival, and they're making their way to the Wine Spring Inn, which actually sits, right near the Wine Spring River, according to the descriptions here. And it just kind of describes bell time, the singing, the dancing, and everything, the music, all of that. And there's just a lot of excitement in the air because this is basically what we would equate to a backwoods town. A town in the middle of the woods, and they don't get a lot of visitors. And this is like the one or two times a year where they have something to do, and they're able to celebrate. So they basically they get over to the Wine Spring Inn, and they're greeted uh, they're greeted by the mayor, by Bran Alvear, and it's just a lot of, I won't say a lot of stuff starts happening, but basically we just start getting a little more um, in depth about what's going on in Emmons Field. Sam Bowie comes out and he starts talking to them about Nynaeve. Um, Everyone wants to talk about Nynaeve Elmira. Everybody wants to talk about this young wisdom, and we're not really given any other indication, um, really, why they have a problem with her other than that she's young. And then I think Sin's got like one little thing that she
Well,
says, but
it does say that this is something that we should point out. The wisdom apparently can do something called listening to the wind, which is like how they tell weather. But it's not it's like a sixth sense that wisdoms have.
and that's kind of one of the roles of the wisdom, is that's what they're supposed to do. They do help lead the village, but they help lead the village by listening to the wind to predict the weather, and they apparently practice healing, which is more of a like herbal home remedy type of healing. It's not like magic or anything. It's just they're basically like a medicine woman.
Yeah, they use herbs, and mostly herbs, to
And I think
have
one of the
different
main things that
effects.
Sam Bowie points out about Nynaeve, because he's going on about other things, and Tam's like, "Okay, Sin, is there a point to what you're saying?" He's like, "This is the point, Althor. Ask the wisdom when winter will end," and she walks away. Maybe she doesn't want to tell us what she hears on the wind. Maybe she hears that the winter won't end. Maybe it's just going to go out on being winter until the wheel turns and the age ends. There's your point. So, I mean, crotchety old Sam Bowie.
I love Tam's response though. Maybe sheep will
Maybe sheep will
fly.
fly. And then Bran Alvear's nearby, and he just throws his hands out and walks away.
He's just
They're
over
both
it.
over it. They're both over this dude.
And this is where we meet for the first time
Matt Cawthon.
Matt Cawthon.
Matt friggin' Cawthon.
And,
So great.
and the first thing he says, the first line Matt Cawthon says to anybody in this book is, "Dav and I caught a big old badger, all grouchy at being pulled out of his den. We're going to let it loose on the green and watch the girls run."
Well, actually, right before that, when he got Rand, he tells him, "Hey, while they're arguing, let's get out of here before they put you to work." So two things about Matt.
Okay, yeah,
he's getting out of work, and he's very, very mischievous.
He's all mischievous. He is, yeah. And Rand's like, "No, we can't do that until," or he says that we can do it later, but he already promised his dad to unload the cider. And of course, as they're chatting around, Matt mentions also noticing, well, he says something about strangers in the Two Rivers, and Rand of course, goes straight to the black cloaked rider that he saw.
Which we find out real quick that Matt actually saw the Black Rider too. So that's a significant development, because now Rand is justified. And he's like, oh, look, Matt saw something too. The thing is, Matt's not the most trustworthy guy in the town, as you can already see, because he caught a badger and wants to let it loose.
Yeah, so but Rand also believes him and doesn't make fun of him or anything about it. And for some reason, Matt thinks it's the Dark One, or the Shepherd of the Night, watching them. Or yeah, they call him the Dark One first, and then they call him the Shepherd of the Night later.
Then he brings up the Forsaken and how they were kind of told this stuff as boys. My mother's always said the Forsaken would come for me if I didn't mend my ways. If I ever saw anybody who looked like a Shamael or Agenor, it was him. And he's talking about the Black Rider. So they're basically they're doing the boyish thing. They're like, oh man, it couldn't be this, could it? They're jumping to conclusions. They're filling in the blanks with their worst fears. They're really trying to, but they're trying to rationalize everything. So kind of moving through trying to get this wrapped up, because we're like way over time.
So yeah, Tam catches Matt and Rand chatting, and he asks Matt to help Rand, and kind of teases him because Matt tries to get out of it, of course, by saying that
I love the way Tam just breaks that. He's just because Matt just jumps up and he's like slowly backing away. He's like, "Good morning to you, Master Althor, and to you, Master Alvir, Master Bowie. May the light shine on you. My dad sent you. Oh, no doubt he did. And no doubt, since you're a lad who does his chores right off, you've finished the task already. Well, the quicker you lads get the cider into Master Alvir's cellar, the quicker you can see the gleeman." So, like, Tam breaks Matt's excuse, but then gives him incentive in the same freaking... Look, Tam Althor is a boss, okay? Like, he's like, Matt, I see through your crap. Help Rand, and then the faster you guys unload this, the faster you can see the gleeman. And then that's all Matt can talk about, literally, for like the next 3 chapters, is the gleeman.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, it's just like dead.
I thought that we had lost connection again,
nope,
like that
just
one
dead.
time.
So then they start freaking about the gleeman, which we kind of learn for everyone out there. There's a distinction in the series between the two, but just for general knowledge, a gleeman is like a traveling bard. You know, he does acrobatics and storytelling and plays music, and he's an entertainer. And they're just very excited because these types of people do not come to the Two Rivers at all. So when Matt hears that, he starts freaking out. Rand is thinking he's only seen 2 gleemen in his whole life. They're in their early 20s, so that's not very many gleemen in one lifetime. So they talk a little bit about the gleeman for a while, that he's already in town, that he's up in the inn, that he arrived in the middle of the night. But then Matt's, talking about a black cloak because he's trying to make sure the gleeman is not the guy that wore the black cloak, and Bran laughs at him and he says, "Black, his cloak is like every gleeman's cloak I've ever seen, more patches than cloak and more colors than you can think of," which I really like. I've just got the graphic novel first volume of Eye of the World, and I really like the way they draw the gleeman's cloak. It's pretty neat. But needless to say, so they begin talking about all these different things, and they find out that there's going to be fireworks. So they're really getting excited for this festival. They're getting super excited. Like, to us, this is like, oh, a dude that can juggle and fireworks. Cool. But for these guys, it's like the epitome of entertainment. This is like, I don't know what kind of example I could give right now, but basically, this is like the highlight of the year. They're stupid excited. They don't really know what to do with themselves, basically.
Yeah. So they Bran and Tam and Senbui end up going inside because there was something that they needed to talk about.
For context on that, Tam and Sen are both on the village council with Bran Alvir, so it's presumably village council business.
Yeah. So they pretty much just chat here, and whenever they leave, Rand tells Matt that he doesn't have to help. And Matt, I think this kind of shows Matt's true character more. I mean, Matt doesn't like to work hard and he likes to goof off a lot, but he does say, "Oh, why not?" Like your dad said, the quicker it's in the cellar. So he's willing to help his friend. But then he also teases Rand in the same sentence or instance, same paragraph. There we go. Maybe Egwene is around. Watching you stare at her like a poleaxed ox will be as good as a badger
And I
any
just have to
day.
say how Wheel of Time is not immune to cliches. And how cliche is it that one of the protagonists that we're already introduced to has a crush on the mayor's daughter? Like, to me, that's very cliche, which, we all know how that, I mean, I say we all know, you and I know how that ultimately ends up. If anything ends up, we're not going to say. But it's funny to me, but it's also a good look. It's a very good look at where these guys are at in their stage of life. They're still young enough that they get embarrassed by girls. They don't know what to do with girls. They play pranks. They're basically big kids, which, I mean, I'm 29, so yeah, 6 to 9 years ago, I was still doing stupid stuff too. So, I mean, it's giving you a real good look at Matt and Rand and how they interact with the town, what they think, you know, who and what they've got their eye on, where their priorities are. Because while Rand's scratching his head about the man in black, basically the rider in black, and is kind of trepidatious in speaking or being around Egwene, Matt is just being Matt. He's like, "Hey, we caught a badger. Oh my god, a gleeman? Yeah, I saw a black cloak guy, but dude, a gleeman and fireworks. Like he's the hype man. He is like stupid excited for this stuff." And Rand's trying to get with it, but it's just the rider in black really is harshing his vibe here. And the last thing they say in this chapter as we wind this up is they're starting to unload everything, and Rand's kind of like, he's stopping, he's thinking about a few different things. I think mostly about Egwene, actually. And then Matt comes back and he says, "Well, I didn't say I would do it by myself. You aren't on the village council yet." And it says, "With the start, Rand took up a cask and followed. Perhaps she would not be there after all," talking about Egwene. And he says, "Oddly, that possibility did not make him feel any better." So he's trying to find ways to make him feel better about what he experienced on the road. And so he's like, "Well, maybe Egwene won't be there, so maybe that'll be good." But he can't even get as excited about these things. It's really bothering him. This thing on the road is really bothering him, and that's kind of the note that chapter 1 ends on. And I know we said we're going to try to do chapter 2, but we're like way over time, so we may do chapters 2 and 3. So I think this episode is just going to be called Dragon Mountain Empty Road. But anyway, guys, so be sure, as we're wrapping things up here, be sure to tell us what you think about the episode. Just hit us up on Twitter. How can they find us, Thorne?
Okay, you can see us on Twitter at OnePowerPod.
You did it.
You can also find us on Facebook. We're also OnePowerPod on Facebook. And then you can also email us directly at onepowerpod@gmail.com.
So if you ever want to get a hold of us, drop a line, tell us, "Hey, your show's great. Hey, your show sucks." Hey, constructive criticism, please. But, we definitely want to hear from you guys. We want to hear stuff. Yeah, don't be easy. It's our first podcast. So
I'll block people for being mean. I promise. I ain't going to play it.
I mean, Green Aja over here. Anyway, which for people who are probably listening, if it's your first time, you don't know what that means yet. But in any case, but I think that's it for us tonight. So we will see you next week. And just remember that the wheel weaves as the wheel wills. And I'm Greg.
And I'm Thorne.
And we will see you next time.
Bye.